Hi there. So you've been looking at the papers around genetically modified crops. And I wonder, did you ask yourselves before you started as a class or a group what your beliefs are like around genetically modified crops? How many of those amongst you are like, yay, we're all for GM? And how many of those are like, you know what, we're not such big fans of GM, we think there's something hidden in them or something we should be more wary about? If you did ask those questions, then having read the papers, has that class opinion changed? Has your opinion changed? Because these papers are written with a view to trying to tell you about the science and what's important. Because when we look at these crops, and I've got some seed here, there's really nothing much to see between the conventional and the genetically modified. When I first came to Australia, I actually thought I was coming to show how bad genetically modified crops were, to show the horrendous and vast changes that they were causing in our soil landscape. But the reality, we didn't find any difference. And part of the reason for that, and I think this is something you need to think about, especially in relation to one of these papers, is suppose there is gross mutational change in the result of putting a genetically modified construct, putting foreign DNA into a plant, and it does something really weird and wacky. How do you think farmers would respond to that? Not well. Farmers are looking for plants that are basically growing the way they're used to. They're looking for a reproducible amount of yield. They're looking for consistency of product. They're looking for the product they're used to. So genetically modified crops aren't going to do things that are completely novel or totally weird or become dangerous to farmers in the way that one of these papers presents. So that paper in particular is by Jonathan Latham and his co-authors. Now, when you critique this, the way in which it's written is actually, I find it quite threatening. It really does tell me that there's a problem on our landscape, that GM crops need to be subjected to all sorts of very vigorous and rigorous testing to prove that they are safe. They're not happy with the notion that 25 years of commercial cultivated genetically modified crops, and there's never really been a problem as a result of that GM technology. They want to continue to push that idea that there is an issue. And in this case, their issue comes from the system and the methods used to put the foreign DNA into these plants. Now, even around that, this is a system, Agrobacterium tumefaciens, genetic insertion of material, is a system that's probably been on this planet since we first got plants, probably about 1 million years ago, and certainly since we had the evolution of the angiosperms, the flowering plants of which cotton is a member. This system, therefore, is old, and it hasn't created triffids that are walking the planet killing humans in that time. So what do they think is going to happen using the same natural system to create plants today? And the answer is they think some horrendous things are going to happen, that there are going to be deleterious and negative consequences. But that's where you then ask yourself again that question. If the plants were really changed, grossly changed, dangerously changed, would farmers actually buy the seed? And if the answer you come up with is no, then why would a company that makes GM crops invest in the time, the technology, and the screening to sell it? Another thing you might critique when you read Jonathan's paper is, where does he come from and who does he represent? And you'll notice that he doesn't represent a university. He doesn't represent particularly a large body or company. He represents his own self-interest, if you like. He represents his own consultancy firm. And one of the papers that they cite several times in this manuscript that they come back to say, look at the evidence, again comes from a publication that they produced, they paid for, and they wrote. Where's the science in it? Well, the answer is the science in this is pretty thin. A lot of it, if you actually go to the papers that they cite, doesn't always support their theories or their argument in its entirety. But if you were to read this, you would probably form the opinion that actually GM cropping and GM cultivation, genetic modification of our crops, is inherently dangerous. And yet nowhere do they say, we never should have used radiation to increase the number of genomes present in wheat. Never should we have used radiation to increase the number of genomes present in strawberries so that we made them bigger. Never should we have used other chemicals to change most of the crops we're eating at the moment. There's a bit of a hidden agenda there, and I don't like that. In comparison, this other paper, written by some bloke called Oliver Knox, it's quite scientific. It's not written for a wider audience. It's written very much for its peers. And it's written, again, with this view that some of what we know about GM technology possibly isn't enough. However, what this paper does that the other one doesn't is it explores what we don't know. It looks at the issue. It actually asks questions about what we're missing and provides answers. And in that regard, apart from having a degree of bias of myself about this paper, I think it's a better paper. It's scientifically more rounded. it's scientifically less biased, and it does actually present an argument for further change and adoption in the system, rather than let's all say no to GM, which at this stage in the game, after 25 years of adoption, I think is somewhat unlikely. So whether you're for GM or whether you're against GM, the information in the papers can maybe help alter those opinions slightly, but again, it's up to you. How do you balance those decisions? And the other thing to remember is it's okay to disagree with people about your opinions on genetic modification. That's fine. But what you have to come back to at the end of the day is, if we're talking about agriculture, maybe ask yourself, what can GM do for agriculture? And if you think it has a benefit, and if you think that benefit is safe enough to outweigh the risks of not adopting it, then surely we have to think about adoption of GM. Thanks for your time, and I hope you enjoyed the papers on genetic modification.